Hi, this is Sam, and welcome to another Monday Musing. Today, we're going to be talking about a very popular form of comic, and that is the autobiographical comic. So, these are typically slice-of-life comics. They tend to follow a newspaper format, so sort of like 4 panels, get your joke in and then get out. You can read one without reading the others, and it'll still make sense and be fine. A lot of them have an art style that reminds me of Brian Lee O'Malley, who did Scott Pilgrim. And some fantastic examples include Rachel Smith's diary comics that she was doing for her Patreon. She's now closed her Patreon and stopped doing the diary comics. Hopefully she'll be collecting the diary comics in a printed format later this year, maybe early next year. Sarah Graylee's Our Super Adventure, which is about her other half, and their cats. You've also got, to a lesser extent, Altered Comics, which is sort of about the main character's internal monologue and their anxieties, and how they interact with both their bodily functions and their emotions, usually to hilarious effect. So, they're usually quite bubbly, quite upbeat. They tend to be web-based. And the big advantage that autobiographical comics have is that they get shared around Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, social media in general, a lot. And the reason being is they're relatable. You get people, sharing them and going, to their boyfriend or whatever, "Oh, babe, this is us. This is totally us. We do this all the time. Yeah, that's us." Likewise with the social anxiety ones, you get people sharing it and going, "Yes, this, exactly this. This is absolutely how it feels, this 100 times over." And, they do reach people who aren't traditionally comics fans, and I think it's partly the fact that because they feel like newspaper strips, they feel a little more familiar to the general public at large. I don't know if that's fair to say, but it's certainly the impression that I get. And I don't know, I've always had a lot of respect for them, but also a lot of questions about them. So, for starters, it is essentially letting someone in behind the curtain to see, your life, essentially. And I think that takes a certain type of character. I think, you've got to be somewhat confident, even if you are talking about insecurities, to get up on a stage and talk about that to the world. Because once something's on the internet, that's it, essentially. Anyone can see it, and you can never really, once something's on the internet, good luck removing it. So, you've got to have a certain conviction to do that in the first place. Now, bearing in mind, you get to choose what you share. If you want it to be upbeat and happy all the time, then you can choose to just show your highlight of the week, the best thing that happened to you that week. I do have concerns about what do these people do, if they just have a boring week, if just nothing happens. I got up, I went to work, I came home, I played with the cats, I went to bed. That could be your week. And then what have you got come, webcomic time? Is it in the minute details? Is it similar to stand-up comedians who sort of sit and observe the world and then tell funny anecdotes, observational humour? Is it sort of like that? I imagine it would be. And sort of this weird thing where, at the same time, do you have to, if it has been a bit of a dull week, do you have to exaggerate? Do you have to go with, this is what I wish I would have said? Do you have to bend the truth a little? I mean, I'm perfectly happy with that if that is the case. It's something I've always wondered, though. And I've never... I don't know, it'd be good to actually sit down with an autobio comic creator and actually ask them these questions, because they've always sort of burned in the back of my mind. There are things like, has there been any repercussions or trouble caused on the back of the autobiographical comic? So, do they change out the names and faces of friends and family members to avoid any problems or drama, or do they simply just avoid including them at all? Thinking of it, a lot of the comics, I see, sort of like the main character and their partner and maybe their pet. I rarely see friends or family, and I'm now wondering if that might be the reason why. But then, do they need those extra characters in there? For example, Rachel Smith, who I mentioned earlier, managed to make a hilarious one-panel comic about visiting a large Asda. That was it. That was the whole comic, and it was funny, it was relatable, And yeah, I smiled. And it's proven to be one of our popular ones, if I dare say so. So the other thing I wonder is not just causing problems with, friends and family, like someone coming up and being like, "Oh, you made me out to be a proper bitch in this issue. Do we have a problem? Do we need to sit down and talk? Huh? Why are you seeing it like that? What's going on?" Not just that, but also, if any of them have day jobs, how it affects work. Have they approached HR? Have they said, "Look, this is what I'm doing. Can I get a list of do's and don'ts?" Because I would imagine that most workplaces would have policies about how their company is represented, how you talk about the company that you work for outside of work. If you do sort of project work, that kind of thing, and you have clients, you probably want to avoid, I'm guessing, talking about clients, because what you don't want is someone either being able to identify themselves, or even worse, wrongly thinking they've identified themselves, because even when you genuinely tell them, "No, that's not about you," they're not going to believe you. They're not. They've convinced themselves by that point that it is about them. So it must be a tricky one. It's got to be a very fine tightrope to walk. And I just don't know. I appreciate the honesty that these creators bring to the table, but I genuinely don't know how they do it, especially on a regular basis. Like, these usually come out to a schedule. Rachel's was like 1 every 2 days or something insane. Most of them are at least weekly, and it just seems like an insane pace to keep up with, unless it's your full-time gig. I guess that would maybe be the only other time that would be okay. I suppose for things like, if you're going on holiday or something like that, and you're not going to be able to post, I suppose they either, have maybe some filler ones that they schedule to auto-upload, or just announce that they're going on a break and everyone's cool with that. I don't know. I don't know how this world of autobiographical comics works. I do find them interesting, though. And it's one of those things that actually I'm going to expose myself to more of, because I read very few of them at the moment, but the ones I do read, they're good as sort of like a nightstand book, if you know what I mean. Something that just before you go to bed for 10 to 15 minutes before you drowse off, you can flick through, read a couple, quite casually, quite lightly, have a smile, put it down, go to sleep. And this is going to come out wrong, I already know, but toilet reading, it seems like a good thing to read on the toilet, because it seems to involve very little commitment from the reader. You can pick it up and leave it at any point. However, that then brings about questions about audience retention. So I know Dan Butcher, who does the fantastic superhero webcomic Vanguard, he said on the Awesome Comics podcast a number of times that he has to write each page of his comic as a cliffhanger to get people to want to come back next week and read the next page, and that he finds that very difficult to do. Now, if you've got an autobiographical comic where each page is essentially a standalone thing, what's to stop someone just, finishing there and maybe not coming back, maybe not picking it up for a few more weeks? What is it that keeps them hooked? Is it an implied relationship with the creator? Do they feel some kind of bond, some kind of kinship, where actually, I want to make sure that, Rachel or Sarah or whoever it may be, I want to make sure they're alright this week. Let's read their comics, see what they've been up to. In that case, it's sort of like vlogs on YouTube, which is, vlogging in general is something I've never really understood, despite the fact that you could argue that this is something like a vlog. So it really puzzles me. It's like this strange alien world that I can't quite comprehend, And it's sort of this weird thing of, if they do form that bond, if they do form that kinship, does it get creepy? I mean, a lot of the people who do these autobio comics, at least the ones that I am aware of, seem to be female, and they already have to deal with creepers at cons, It's like, I've never been selling my books at a convention and had to worry about people hitting on me. My female creator friends, they have had that problem. They have had to deal with that. And it's not pleasant at all. So, do they get that? If they're then sharing details about their lives, do they then get that, tenfold? Does that increase? Does it make the problem worse? And it's sort of one of those weird things, because usually I come into a Monday Musing and it's something that I've researched, or I know a little bit about, or I've had chats with people before. And mainly, I'm coming to this Monday Musing with, I guess this is the first true musing, because I'm coming to this one with not answers, but a hell of a lot of questions. The other thing I would ask, and I think this is more webcomics in general, and not just, autobiographical comics, but the sizing is always quite weird, so I imagine that makes printing quite tricky. Now, my assumption is that anyone creating an autobio comic for the web would create at print resolution. 300 dpi, whichever size they're going for. Seems to be A5 is quite popular for these. Do them as an ashcan sort of thing if you ever print them. So you make that, and then they scale down for web to 72 dpi. And from, obviously, working in a design job, having some experience with print, I can tell you it's, much easier to scale down than up. You definitely want to be scaling down. Always start with, basically the ideal would always be to work at double the size that you want to print at. However, if you want to work directly at the size you want to print at, that is also fine. That will be okay, essentially. I'm getting sidetracked, but whether, when they start these, have they ever had to redraw? Because actually they've done 20 or so. That might not even be enough to put a collection together, but they've done enough where they're saying, right, I want to print these, but actually because they went in saying this is a webcomic, they did it for web format from the start, and then they possibly end up having to redraw it at print resolution. That must have happened to some poor soul somewhere. It's just got to. And it's weird. It's just this, like I said earlier, it's this world that I do not understand. I often feel like a grumpy old man at conventions and things like that. Well, I'm only 28. My other half describes me as a 52-year-old trapped inside a 28-year-old's body. And even then, this body's probably in worse shape than the one the 52-year-old came from. But at any rate, I am grumpy, cynical. I generally don't like the world very much, I'm sorry to say. And I just don't understand these kids and their humour. I don't. And I think that's partly why I don't get this whole scene, if that makes sense, the autobiographical scene. And I don't know, maybe I'm just removed from it. It's like I don't really get Instagram. I do Facebook and Twitter. I really don't get Instagram. But I would really love to, especially if any of you guys are up for it, the ones that do create autobiographical comics, I would really like to just, sit down with you, have a chat, and actually ask some of these questions, get some answers, maybe do a follow-up video. That could be really fun. Sort of like, I ask all the questions I've got now, have some chats with various autobio creators, and then come back, and if anyone's happy for me to divulge the answers I got from you, say, these were the questions I had. I spoke to this creator, this creator, this creator. The general consensus seemed to be this. That could be really cool. But for now, I'm going to leave you slightly confused, but very enthusiastic about autobiographical comics. If you have one, if you do one, then let me know, because I want to see it. I want to read it. I want to essentially just experience more of them. So, if you've got one, please let me know. Bear in mind, YouTube, if you post a link in YouTube comments, it automatically marks it as spam. So feel free to, ping me a private message on Twitter or something and just say, oh, hey, I've commented, it's probably gone to the spam folder. And I'll just go in and I'll okay it. I'll just say, yeah, fine. There you go, and I'll approve the comment, and then it'll appear. But anyway, that is me for now. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll be back next week with either a different topic entirely, or, depending on whether those conversations happen in that short a space of time, we could be looking at some answers, and that would be really exciting. Thank you very much for watching.